You hear it quite a bit in residential real estate about how apparently real estate is one of the least trusted professions. And let's really clear the air here on that, because let's think about what actually happens. If there are 20 buyers that come to a property and one person gets it, there's potentially 19 other people that are very upset about that. And they're upset because they didn't get the opportunity to go and pursue that particular home because maybe they didn't have the capacity to be able to spend at that particular level. And let's say inside of what happens inside of property management, you might have 10, 20, 30, 40 people come to an inspection on a rental property. And in a hot rental market, you might have 5 or 6 that actually go to apply. Only one person is actually going to get the opportunity to go and lease that particular property. Now, the interesting conversation is like 4 or 5 other people that are going to be pretty upset by that. So naturally, as an industry, we're in a position that we're probably going to disappoint more people than we actually make happy. But what can we do to really make sure that we don't bruise the client on the way through? And this is a really important conversation for what we've got to call the moments that really matter. And what you got to do is you got to get yourself back into the client's shoes of what would it feel like to be in their position in wanting to go and buy a property. What would it feel like if a property was on the market for a long period of time as a seller? And what do they need to do next in order to go and get sold? And this is ultimately what great real estate agents are all about. They go to find those moments that matter and they get themselves out of those sticky situations by making sure that they've got really clear procedures, phenomenal systems and great documentation to really explain to people what actually happens during those particular situations so that ideally no one gets bruised during the course of the transaction. Let's think about how that might actually happen. A buyer goes to make an offer on a property. What actually happens next? Wouldn't it be great if you had like a 1-page PDF that explains what actually happens next with their offer? What actually happens though if they're in a multi-offer situation? Wouldn't it be great if you had a 1-pager that explained what it is that you got to do in terms of a multi-offer situation? Are you in a position where it's like best offers forward on an envelope? Are you in a position that ultimately no one gets to know what the other offer is? Are you in a position that ultimately you just go backwards and forwards between each party and you disclose the numbers? Or are you in a position that you just call a really clear, open and transparent auction process, which is done inside of your boardroom or on Zoom, which allows everyone to know exactly where everyone else is at? Now, that's just a great example that there's a lot of ways that you can do it, but how do you actually make sure that it's less frustrating, but most importantly, very clear to consumers on what they need to do to put themselves into that winning position? Ultimately, when it comes to tenancy, what does it really look like in terms of applying for property and what are the next steps? And what are the things going to put you in good stead in order for your application to be received? It might be timeliness, the speed at which you'd move into the property, conversations around what you'd go to do in terms of the number of people living in the property, the amount of income that you earn, all of those things that come into the matrix of how we go to make decisions in selecting a particular tenant. That's what I'm trying to get you to think about. Every single time that you're in business, you're going to find yourself in situations that are interesting. Maybe, for example, you've got offer and acceptance on the property and you're on your way over to go to the buyer to go and sign them up on that contract. And then another buyer rings and they increase their offer for $5,000 above the offer that's just been accepted. What do you do at that point? Ultimately, this is where it gets into that murky situation. Is there full disclosure? Do we talk to the owners? Do we just deny that? Do we go back to the buyers? Do we reopen the negotiations? What's really important is to realize that you've got to make sure that you are clear and open in your communication. What happens if that buyer goes and door knocks that particular seller? What happens if they ring the solicitor and put the offer through the solicitor? Your job is to make sure that you're very clear about what you're going to be doing and that ultimately you're having those conversations with your owners so they are fully informed of every situation and that you put it back into their court on what they'd like you to do as their agent as you go to represent them. It's the moment that matters that changes everything in terms of your reputation in industry. But now, more than ever before, we need to make sure that we're really clear about those moments that matter. This is great conversation at your sales meeting to make sure that you iron out all of those issues. Most importantly, that you produce those great 1-pagers on what to do in the sticky situations that actually happen inside of residential real estate.